Alright, what is up guys? Welcome back. Classroom is back in session. I'm going to start this video with a trigger warning, especially if you're a Chinese immigrant. You're not going to like this video. So I'm going to reveal to you guys some dark secrets about Asian immigrants. Okay, this is one of the methods the Chinese people have been using for backdoor immigration, and how these Chinese people, especially older Chinese women, they're using this backdoor system to double dip on Canada and US on their pension system. So what do I mean? Okay, there's a lot to cover. As you guys can see, I put some notes on the board. So let's follow along, okay? There's a lot to discuss. So this is correct up to August of 2024. So this is the retirement age in China. They just reached it by 5 years. So generally speaking, women in China who works in the blue collar industry, if they want to, they can retire as young as 50, yes. And if they work in the white collar industry, so you can retire as young as 53. Obviously, you can choose to stay and work for longer if you need the money, or perhaps you don't want to just stay home and do nothing all day. Yes, but you have the option if you're in the blue collar work field as a Chinese woman to retire as young as 50. Has been raised to 55. So this is correct as of August of 2024. What about man? So for man, it's blue collar industries 55. If you're working in the white collar industries, 58. And look at this hypocrisy, right? Life expectancy for Chinese women is 82, for Chinese men 77. So despite that, the fact that Chinese men live on average 5 years shorter, they typically have to work at least 5 years longer. And I can tell you it's way longer than that. Usually it's probably 10 years because, men are expected to be the breadwinners, right? A lot of times the women, they do get to retire at 50 or 53, but oftentimes men have to keep working for a very long time. It's very normal for a man to work until he's 65 or 70 in China because he's expected to bring home the cash. Now this is very important, especially this part, right? 50 and 53 for Chinese women. So as you guys can see, the Chinese women, right, they can retire very, very young and they can start to collect the government pension. I mentioned, obviously, this pension is projected to run out by 2035. China is facing a lot of issues. Now, if you're living in Canada, right, typically speaking, the universal retirement age is 65, okay? But some people, if you want to, you can retire at the age of 60. But obviously, your pension and the old age security is going to be a lot less. By the way, you don't have to become a Canadian citizen in order to collect the old age security. All you need is a green card. You need a permanent residency card, and you need to live in Canada after you turn the age of 18 for a minimum of 10 years. And so if you live in Canada for longer than 20 years after you turn the age of 18, your old age security goes up by a certain amount. If you live in Canada, obviously for 30 years after you turn 18, it goes up more. And the maximum you can collect is that after you turn 18, if you lived in Canada for over 40 years, and if you choose to collect your old age security, that's when you can get the maximum amount. That's how it works. But so here's the thing, right? Let's say if you're a Chinese woman, let's say, if you work in the white collar industry, you hit 53, right? You retire. So Canada, right? Retirement age for women. Most women retire at the age of 65. Let me add this. So there's a lot to cover. Let's follow along the board. That's why I'm writing this down. So there's a 12 years gap. Remember, all you need to do in order to qualify for the minimum amount for the old age security is to live in Canada for at least 10 years. Here's where things get interesting. So let's say what happens if you're a Chinese woman. So up until basically before the COVID pandemic, there were direct flights coming out of China straight to these Canadian cities that I have laid out on the map. And for now, there are no direct flights, but you can easily take a connection flight. Now let's get back to the board. So let's say if you're a Chinese woman that works as an accountant, okay, I'm gonna flip my camera. So let's say you retire at the age of 53. So you're collecting Chinese pension at this point. So the pension from the Chinese government. What if you have a son that's, say, 26-year-old son that's living in Canada. Let's say he lived in the city of Vancouver, or perhaps Richmond, BC. By the way, Richmond, BC, just outside of Vancouver, that's where the Vancouver International Airport is, has the largest concentration of Chinese people outside of Asia. I believe it's something like 55 or even 60% of the population of the city is Chinese. So this is a massive, massive Chinese stronghold in just outside of Vancouver. So for example, let's say a woman, who's 53, right? She's collecting Chinese pension and she's retired in China. And she decides to get a 2 weeks tourist visa. She says that, I'm coming to Canada to visit my son. I'm going on vacation in Vancouver. I remember, right? This is been happening up until August of 2024, and so many Chinese people have done this. They simply get a 2-week tourist visa. It's very cheap. You can get it for maybe $50 or $100, and they overstay their visa and they never leave. So she's going to book a flight from Beijing all the way to Vancouver. This is perhaps 10 or 11 hours. It's not that long of a flight. And once she gets to the West Coast with a tourist visa, she will simply overstay her tourist visa. What do you guys think happens when she turns 65, 12 years later? Now she's double dipping the pension. So she's collecting the old age security, the OAS, from the Canadian government. And she's also double dipping on the Chinese pension from the Chinese Communist Party. She's collecting 2 pensions. Here's the crazy part, okay? Some of these Chinese women, right? I mentioned Chinese women because it's very rare that Chinese men do this, because most Chinese men retire very, very late. It's very normal they have to work until they're 65 or 70 or even 75, because men have to keep on making money. But yeah, most Chinese women do retire very, very young. It's very normal for a Chinese woman to retire at 50 or 53. So what happens is sometimes, let's say it's the year of 2000, right? Let's just make it simple, right? This Chinese woman, she's 53, she just retired, and she flies over to Vancouver. She lands in Richmond, BC. What do you guys think happens there? She can say that, I want to hop on a bus, I want to go on tour in Seattle. So Vancouver, right, Seattle, it's on the US side. This is USA. It's not very, very far. Probably, 3-4 hours bus ride, I imagine. Haven't been to the West Coast. I don't think it takes very long. But here's the thing, right? So if you're holding a Chinese passport, right, when you're entering Canada, when you're flying, let's say this is Air Canada or Air China, when you first land in Canada, your passport is stamped. It shows the exact date. Let's say March 1st, right? March 1st, 2000. She lands in Richmond, BC. But if you take a bus from Richmond, Vancouver area to the Seattle, Washington area, your passport does not get stamped. Okay, this is very, very interesting, because I've been to the United States so many times, right? At the border, they check your passport, they check the expiry date, they check your photo, and they ask you some questions. But the passport at the US-Canadian border, it never ever gets stamped, right? So what happens is that, if she chooses to fly from Beijing and she lands in Vancouver, she takes a bus in Seattle, her passport is not stamped. So it shows that she has never ever left Canada. So the Canadian government thinks that she's been living in Canada this whole time. Keep in mind, this is when she's 53 in the year of 2000, and she can take a bus. She says, I'm going on a tour in Seattle, right? Then she can book a flight from Seattle back to Beijing, right? So this is a 10, 11-hour flight. So here's the crazy part. On her Chinese passport, it shows the exact date when she has landed in Canada. But however, after all of these years, it does not show when she has ever left. And if you're wondering, when she lands back in Beijing, doesn't her passport get stamped? Well, yes, it does get stamped. It shows that her entry date back into China. So as you can see, there could be a conundrum. But have you guys heard of something called forgery? Yes. It's a very, very serious issue in China. It is so easy, for these people to get a fake ID, fake driver's license, fake passport. So when she gets back, let's say to Beijing, she can easily spend, let's say $500 on forgery. And the stamp that shows that the date that she returned to Beijing, they can easily get rid of that stamp. No, I'm serious. This has been happening for many, many years. So what ends up happening is that, let's say, 2000, she's 53. She flies over to Vancouver, Richmond, BC area. So on her Chinese passport, there's a stamp. It shows that she entered Canada on March 1st, 2000. Then 2 weeks later, she takes a bus to Seattle. There's no stamp, so the Canadian government doesn't know when she left. And then she books a flight all the way back to Beijing. And she uses the method of forgery. She pays somebody $500 or $1,000. She gets rid of that stamp, shows the date that she returned to China. So on her Chinese passport, it only shows that when she left China and when she arrived in Canada. So let's say 12 years later, 2012, guess what? She's 65. She can collect Canada's old age security. So if you only lived in Canada for 12 years, if you try to collect it at 65, it might not be very much. It could be, let's say, $1,200 a month as of 2024. But still, you have to remember $1,200 a month, right? Converted to Chinese yuan, that's something like 6,300 yuan. And she's also collecting the pension from the Chinese Communist Party. So her pension could easily be double that. She could be collecting 12,000 yuan. So as I'm recording this video, okay, hundreds and thousands of Chinese women that are committed in this type of scam. Yes, and hundreds of thousands of these Chinese women, they don't even live in Canada, right? They just simply came over to Canada perhaps 10, 15, 20 years ago on a tourist visa. And many of them is the same thing. If you land on the East Coast, if you fly from Beijing to, let's say, Toronto, that could be a 13-hour flight, right? And they can find a Chinese lawyer to do these things. There's a website, it's called CFC, Come From China. Yes. Come From China. You can check it out, right? You can translate the website to English, and there are actually services. You can actually find Chinese lawyers who engage in these type of Chinese immigration, the backdoor scams, and how you can get permanent residence in the non-legitimate way. So many Chinese people, right, they would simply land in either Richmond or Markham. So for the Chinese woman that lands in Toronto, and if they decide to stay in Markham, they can simply say that I'm going on vacation, right? I'm going to cross over to the US from Toronto to Niagara Falls to Buffalo, then to upstate. They're landing in New York City, but they will take a bus tour. So when you take a bus tour, your passport once again is not stamped, and they can book a flight from NYC back in to Beijing or to Shanghai or to Shenzhen or to Guangzhou or to Hong Kong, China. And obviously, and if you live on the West Coast, right, many Chinese women, they will land in San Francisco. They will do the exact same thing. So this is a backdoor immigration scam. So just to recap things, to make things clear, many Chinese women, let's say that if they retire at the age of 53, they will simply come over to Canada on a tourist visa. They get their passport stamped on their entry. The thing is, they don't leave via flight from Canada. They will simply book a vacation. They will take a bus tour from Vancouver to Seattle or from Toronto to New York City, so that their passport is not stamped. So the Canadian government only knows when the Chinese citizen, when they actually arrived in Canada. So they think that these Chinese women, they have been in Canada this whole time. And after they book a flight back to China, they can find a Chinese lawyer. They will use a method of forgery. They will get rid of their stamp of an entry back into China. So when they turn 65, 12 years later, by the way, they have been collecting their Chinese pension for 12 years now. The Canadian government is going to send these women in mail. They're going to think that, oh, these Chinese women, okay, they have been living in Canada for the past 12 years. They're 65 years now. It's time to give them your old age security. And these Chinese women, they will collect Canada's old age security all the way until death. Now let's calculate this amount, okay? Let's write this down. So let's say roughly, if you only live in Canada for 10 to 12 years, right? $1,200 a month. So multiply this by 12 months, right? And multiply this by the life expectancy for a Chinese woman. 82 minus 65, that's 17 years. And let's say, there's no exact number. Let's say if there are 100,000 Chinese women that's doing this scam, right? Multiply this number by 100,000. Let's see how much this is costing Canadian taxpayers. I hope you guys are ready for the final amount. So here it is. $24.48 billion Canadian. Now, obviously, the 100,000, there's no way to know exactly how many Chinese women are doing this in Canada. And this would not be just over the course of 1 year. So the 24 billion, that could be spread out over 30 years. So this scam could be costing Canadian taxpayers, let's say, who knows, $700 million a year. There's no way to get an exact amount, but I can tell you one thing for sure is that it is very, very expensive. And once again, some of these Chinese women, they simply arrived in Canada on a tourist visa. They have never, ever lived in Canada, right? They stay for a few days. They booked a bus from Vancouver to Seattle or from Toronto to Niagara Falls, then to New York City. They hire a Chinese lawyer in Canada. They go on websites like CFC, many other sketchy websites, right? They say, give me a fake Canadian address, okay? I'm just gonna pretend that I live in Canada, so that 12 years later, so the Canada's revenue agency, they're going to send me a letter that's going to come in the mail. They say that, congratulations, you're a Canadian permanent resident. You have been living in Canada for the last 12 years. It's time to collect your old age security. And this whole time, for the past 12 years, they have been collecting China's pension as well. So they're double dipping their pension while having never, ever lived in Canada. Okay, if you think I'm making this up, by the way, the 24.48 billion, that's a really rough number. There's no way to say exactly, but it is at the very, very minimum, it is costing Canadian taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And right now, I can guarantee you this is still happening. There's probably at least, who knows, 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 women living across China that had done this exact same thing to Canada, to the United States government. They have never ever lived in the Canada or United States, but they're double dipping on the government pension. Where do you think Canada gets their old age security from? From the hardworking middle class. It is our taxpayers' dollars that's been funding this scam. And if you think I'm making this up, right? There's a Chinese lawyer. Look up Sunny Wang. Yeah. So, look up that name, okay? So, Sunny Wang, he was arrested many years ago. He helped over 1,600 Chinese nationals to fund their scams just like this one. Mostly Chinese women. And many of these Chinese women, like I said, they've never lived in Canada whatsoever. But however, they're able to collect their pension old age security from the Canadian government because of this backdoor immigration scam. Canada has been allowing this to happen for decades. Obviously, eventually, Sunny Wang, he was arrested and busted. What do you guys think happened to Sunny Wang? So, out of the 1,600 Chinese nationals he helped, mostly Chinese women, he made $10 million Canadian. When he was busted, he was fined $900,000 by the Canadian government. So he has a net profit of $9.1 million. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison, but guess what? He only served 2 years. Now he walked out of prison, 100% free man. And he has multiple mansions across Canada, in British Columbia, in the province of Alberta. I think he has at least 2, perhaps one in Calgary, one in Edmonton. He also has a mansion in the Greater Toronto area as well. So from what I can see is that he owns at least 3 to 4 multi-million-dollar mansions in Canada. He helped 1,600 Chinese nationals to illegally get their permanent residency and to help them double dip on Canada's pension plan, to help them double dip on Canada's old age security. And all he did was serve 2 years. 2 years in prison, and he owns multiple multi-million-dollar mansions in Canada, and he made $10 million. He gets fined $900,000. So what? He still has a net profit of $9.1 million. The Canadian government has been allowing this to happen for many, many decades. Okay, your government has failed you. The government has betrayed the Canadian citizens. Why is this still allowed to happen? Because this is only going to destroy the middle class. And if you think this is bad, right? Just wait until you see what the Indians will come up with within the next 5 to 10 years. In fact, many of their plans is probably already well underway. You know, why do you think there's an explosion of Indian population that's coming to Canada in the past 9 years since Justin Trudeau came to office? Whatever scam, whatever, Ponzi scheme the Chinese has come up with, I can guarantee you the Indian immigrants, okay, they will come up with a better method, and it is going to completely destroy everything in Canada. So if you're still pro-immigration at this point, I think you have absolutely lost your mind. Everybody needs to basically get a clear picture of what's going on. You have to realize at this point, immigration is doing way more harm versus any benefit to Western society. And if you actually want a future in any Western country, you have to realize that right now the #1 problem is immigration, even legal immigration. It is doing virtually zero benefits and almost all harm. If you want to save the future of Western civilization, then I think the #1 priority for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years is to completely shut down immigration. Okay, I'm just giving you guys the brutal, honest truth. What happened to those 1,600 Chinese nationals? A few got arrested and deported, but over 90% of them, absolutely nothing happened. I can bet you that at least 2, 3, 400 of those Chinese women right now they're living comfortably back in China, and they're still double dipping on Canada's old age security and the Canada pension plan while having never ever lived in Canada. So there you have it.